For these 6 individuals, what began as harmless jokes became deadly encounters that cost them their lives. From workplace pranks to social media stunts, these are the stories of people whose final moments were shaped by others. It was January 14th, 2016, in downtown Seattle, where morning rain left the sidewalks and building entrances slick with moisture. Inside a 15-story office tower, the marble floors near the elevator bank still showed a faint sheen from recent cleaning, and small puddles accumulated where employees tracked in water from outside. The 15th floor housed the claims department of a long-established regional insurance firm. Most staff filtered in just before 9 a.m., hanging damp coats, shaking off umbrellas, and settling into cubicles that overlooked the city's dense winter clouds. Witnesses later told investigators the atmosphere was typical for a rainy weekday, quiet enough to hear phones ringing and keyboards tapping, but busy with employees preparing for morning meetings. Harold Hal Peterson, 52, had arrived shortly before the usual rush. Co-workers noted he followed his routine precisely, stopping at his desk only briefly before heading toward the conference area with his briefcase, printed reports, and laptop. He was known for maintaining strict timing before presentations, often walking the corridors at a brisk, practiced pace. A few minutes earlier, several employees had noticed junior adjuster Jason Mitchell lingering near the break room with a small bottle taken from the kitchenette cabinet. Security footage later showed him applying a thin, nearly invisible coat of cooking oil across a narrow stretch of marble just outside the conference room entrance. Staff members told investigators he had done it as a workplace prank meant to make Hal slip briefly during his usual rushed walk. He then returned to his desk with a clear view of the hallway, and co-workers later recalled him glancing up repeatedly as though anticipating a reaction. At 8:47 a.m., Hal walked toward the conference room, carrying both his laptop bag and an overfilled briefcase. Witnesses saw him approach the conference room at his usual pace, adjusting the shoulder strap of his bag as he neared the freshly polished marble strip. The moment his right shoe contacted the oil, his foot slid forward sharply. He attempted to brace himself, but the combination of the slick surface, the weight of the bags, and his forward momentum caused him to fall sideways. Several employees seated nearby reported hearing the initial slip, followed by a heavy impact as Hal struck the floor and then the lower portion of the glass wall panel beside the conference doorway. Investigators noted the glass did not shatter, but the corner of the metal frame created a focused point of impact against the side of Hal's head. Witnesses saw him roll slightly onto his back with minimal movement afterward. A pool of blood formed within seconds, spreading across the marble and mixing with the thin layer of oil. Employees called emergency services immediately. Paramedics reached the floor approximately 6 minutes later and began treatment in the hallway. They documented a severe skull fracture and traumatic brain injury consistent with a concentrated lateral impact. Hal never regained responsiveness and was pronounced dead at a nearby trauma facility later that afternoon. Floor staff provided investigators with hallway footage and written statements confirming the sequence of events. The small bottle of cooking oil was recovered from the break room cabinet, and residue on the marble matched the area where Hal slipped. Investigators concluded that Jason had applied the oil as a workplace prank intended to cause a brief slip, not realizing the risk it created. The official finding listed the death as resulting from blunt force head trauma, following intentional tampering with a walking surface. Jason was removed from the building during the inquiry and later faced charges connected to the incident. It was April 7, 2015, in Richmond, Virginia, where mild spring weather contrasted with the controlled environment of a high-level chemistry classroom inside a local academic building. Students in an advanced chemistry course had gathered for their final practical demonstrations, and the lab had been prepared earlier that morning with standard safety checks, diluted reagents, and designated presentation benches arranged in rows. The assignment required students to explain reaction rates using safe, low-concentration chemicals. Staff members overseeing the event later described the room as orderly and quiet, with students reviewing notes while waiting their turn. The benches held only teacher-approved materials, and each setup included safety goggles, gloves, and labeled containers of diluted acids, bases, and catalysts appropriate for high school-level reactions. 17-year-old Rachel Morrison began arranging her demonstration on reaction rate changes using low-molarity sulfuric acid and metal catalysts. Witnesses later said she moved confidently between her materials, pausing occasionally to review her checklist and confirm proper placement of each item. She had earned a reputation for precision in lab work and often completed assignments ahead of schedule. Her lab partner, Brad Williams, had prepared a separate segment of the presentation. Several students later told investigators they had noticed him handling a clicker-style mechanical noise device he had brought from home. The device, which produced a sharp snapping sound similar to a loud cap popper, was intended as a prank to startle Rachel during her presentation. Brad said later he believed it would cause a brief pause or nervous laugh, and had not considered the effect it might have near glassware and reactive materials. As Rachel began demonstrating how catalyst surface area affects reaction rate, she moved to record her observations on the worksheet. When she reached for her pen, Brad triggered the noise device behind her. Multiple students stated they heard a sudden, sharp crack that echoed against the lab's tile and metal surfaces. Startled, Rachel flinched and knocked her forearm against a beaker containing the diluted acid solution. The beaker tipped, spilling the liquid across the bench and onto her neck and jawline. Witnesses near the front row saw her instinctively step backward, striking another piece of glassware that slid off the bench and shattered on the floor. In her attempt to steady herself, she slipped on the spreading liquid and fell to the ground. Students reported that Rachel immediately showed signs of chemical burns, including reddening skin and difficulty keeping her eyes open. Lab staff activated the emergency shower within seconds, but some of the solution had already reached sensitive areas around her airway. When she inhaled sharply during the initial shock, misted droplets entered her upper respiratory tract, causing swelling that made breathing progressively harder. Emergency responders arrived in 4 minutes and initiated airway support while flushing affected areas. Despite their efforts, the combination of chemical burns and airway damage led to complications over the following hours. Rachel was pronounced dead at a nearby medical facility later that evening. Investigators collected statements from students and staff, confirming that the noise device had been used intentionally as a prank in close proximity to active lab materials. The official finding listed the death as resulting from chemical burns and airway injury following an unintended spill triggered by a disruptive device. Brad was removed from campus during the investigation and later faced juvenile charges related to the incident. It was August 29, 2017, in Flagstaff, Arizona, where late summer heat settled over the city, and delivery drivers moved through their afternoon routes. The highways north of Flagstaff featured steep grades, narrow curves, and frequent elevation changes, conditions that required steady attention from commercial drivers. Reports from other drivers on the same route later described the traffic as light and the pavement dry, with clear visibility across the mountain corridor. Carlos Mendoza, 23, had begun his scheduled circuit through rural delivery points earlier that morning. According to company logs, he was operating a loaded cargo van equipped with standard safety restraints and an onboard GPS unit that tracked position and speed. Co-workers later described Carlos as consistent with his timing and careful with route procedures, often checking in during rest stops to confirm his progress. His phone was kept on the dashboard mount, a common practice among drivers who relied on navigation and dispatcher updates. Investigators later learned that Carlos had asked relatives to contact him if any family medical issues arose, and records showed that his phone was active throughout the day. His cousin, Miguel Mendoza, had sent messages to him before, often using spoofed numbers as part of ongoing pranks. Phone metadata later confirmed that on this day, Miguel used a number masking application to send messages purporting to be from a local medical facility. The texts were timed to reach Carlos while he was traveling through one of the tighter sections of the mountain highway. At 3:18 p.m., the GPS record showed Carlos entering a segment of roadway characterized by a downhill grade and a series of consecutive curves. Around this same time, his phone received multiple spoofed emergency messages. Crash analysts later reconstructed the sequence. The van's speed increased above the posted limit within seconds of the alerts arriving, and braking patterns showed brief, intermittent inputs rather than controlled deceleration. Investigators concluded that the combination of high speed and distraction reduced his ability to react to the approaching turn. Tire marks on the asphalt indicated that the van drifted toward the center line before sharply correcting. The correction steered the vehicle toward the outside guardrail, striking it at an angle that exceeded the barrier's capacity to redirect the van. The rail buckled and detached from two posts, allowing the vehicle to leave the roadway. The van descended a steep, rocky embankment before coming to rest against a stand of small pine trees roughly 180 feet downslope. A driver traveling several minutes behind Carlos reported seeing dust rise from the embankment and notified emergency services. Responders reached the site within 9 minutes and found the van heavily damaged with no signs of survivable injury. The official medical assessment stated that the blunt force trauma sustained during the descent and final impact was incompatible with life. Investigators examined Carlos's phone, confirming that the emergency messages were fabricated and delivered through a masking application. The timing of the texts aligned with the moment the vehicle accelerated beyond safe limits and deviated from its lane position. The final report identified the cause of the crash as loss of control due to driver distraction triggered by fraudulent messages sent as a prank. Miguel was interviewed during the inquiry and later faced charges related to the incident. It was November 12, 2014 in Mobile, Alabama, where mild autumn temperatures and clear skies made for steady afternoon foot traffic around a neighborhood convenience store on the city's west side. Regular customers moved in and out of the building, and the parking lot security cameras recorded a typical Friday pattern of brief visits and routine transactions. Dorothy Williams, 63, arrived shortly after 3 p.m. According to store footage, she followed her usual pattern of purchasing a small set of low-cost items and a selection of scratch-off lottery tickets from the counter display. Witnesses later described her as a quiet regular who often completed her purchases without extended conversation. That afternoon, the store was staffed by a single employee, 19-year-old Tyler Jackson, who handled transactions while restocking shelves between customers. Investigators later learned that Tyler had been experimenting with pranks involving altered promotional materials. He had produced a set of imitation scratch-off cards designed to display misleading results when revealed. The cards were not inserted into any state-regulated dispensers, but were mixed into a small stack of promotional giveaway tickets kept near the counter. Several employees reported during interviews that Tyler had shown them these modified cards in the past, describing them as jokes intended to surprise customers with unusual or obviously incorrect results. Security footage confirmed that the promotional stack had been left on the counter within easy reach of customers. When Dorothy completed her purchase, she picked up one of the imitation cards along with her legitimate tickets, a detail Tyler later acknowledged he noticed but did not correct. She returned to her vehicle and began scratching the legitimate tickets first, then the altered one. A customer walking toward the store noticed Dorothy exit her vehicle and approach the counter holding the imitation ticket. Audio in the store did not capture the full exchange, but investigators noted that Dorothy questioned the legitimacy of the ticket, and Tyler informed her it was not valid and originated from the promotional stack. The customer reported seeing Dorothy pause after the explanation, brace her hand against the doorway frame and appear momentarily unsteady, with a noticeable change in her breathing before she stepped back. Moments later, she lost balance and collapsed onto the concrete outside the entrance. Moments later, she collapsed onto the concrete apron outside the entrance. Bystanders called emergency services while store employees initiated basic first aid procedures. Responders arrived in approximately 5 minutes and documented an episode consistent with sudden cardiac arrest. Attempts at resuscitation continued during transport but were unsuccessful. and she was pronounced dead at a nearby medical facility. The medical review stated that Dorothy had underlying cardiovascular disease, including hypertension, and that the sudden physiological stress associated with the event was a contributing factor in the fatal arrhythmia. The report did not identify a single isolated cause, but cited an acute cardiac episode triggered during the interaction at the store. Investigators collected the altered promotional cards, along with store footage and employee statements. The final report concluded that the misleading scratch-off card had been created as part of a prank, and that its unintended distribution to a customer contributed to the chain of events leading to the medical emergency. Tyler was dismissed during the inquiry and later faced charges related to the production and distribution of unauthorized lottery-like materials. It was June 18, 2013, in Omaha, Nebraska, where a warm evening and steady 72-degree temperatures kept activity light around a small suburban warehouse complex on the city's northern edge. A maintenance crew had finished its daytime rounds hours earlier, and only a few office staff and late-shift workers remained inside the building as the sun began to set. Frank Rodriguez, 41, worked the evening inventory shift at the distribution facility. Company records showed he had been employed there for 11 months, primarily assisting with stock verification, forklift checks, and end-of-day equipment inspections. Co-workers later described him as methodical, often completing his tasks early and using the remaining time to organize tools and check equipment logs. The maintenance area, where he worked most evenings, contained ladders, extension cords, compressed air equipment, and rolling tool cabinets positioned along the concrete corridor. Multiple employees told investigators that a co-worker, 26-year-old Evan Clark, had a habit of staging minor practical jokes. These typically involved harmless alterations to shared equipment, such as switching labels or placing small objects inside tool drawers. Earlier in the week, Evan had discussed setting up what he called a quick scare for Frank involving an air hose commonly used for dusting equipment. Evan believed the noise alone, an abrupt release of compressed air, would startle Frank as he walked into the maintenance bay. Shortly after 8:30 p.m., security cameras recorded Evan attaching a zip tie to the trigger of an air nozzle and positioning the hose on a workbench near the entrance to the equipment area. He then ran the hose behind several toolboxes so that it rested partially across the walkway. Investigators later confirmed that Evan intended the hose to shift when stepped on, activating the air nozzle for a brief, loud burst of sound. At 8:47 p.m., Frank entered the maintenance bay carrying a clipboard and small parts container. The cameras showed him reviewing a checklist as he walked. When he stepped on the loosely positioned hose, it moved unexpectedly, tightening the attached zip tie and depressing the air nozzle trigger. The resulting blast of compressed air struck the metal workbench, creating a sharp impact noise that echoed across the concrete walls. Footage indicated that Frank reacted abruptly to the unexpected sound, stepping backward and to his right. His foot caught the edge of a low-rolling tool cabinet that had been left partially pulled out from the wall. Investigators documented that the cabinet moved under his weight, causing Frank to lose balance and fall sideways. He struck the back of his head on the corner of a steel equipment rack before collapsing to the floor. A nearby employee heard the sound of the fall and called for assistance. Emergency responders arrived within 6 minutes and initiated treatment. The medical team documented severe head trauma consistent with a high-force impact to a fixed metal surface. Frank was transported to a nearby medical facility, where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Investigators reviewed the security footage, examined the modified air hose assembly, and interviewed employees on site. The final report concluded that the death resulted from blunt force head trauma, following a fall triggered by a prank involving improperly secured compressed air equipment. Evan was dismissed during the investigation and later faced charges related to negligent tampering with workplace tools. It was February 3, 2018, in Dallas, Texas, where a cold 28-degree morning kept most employees indoors as staff prepared for a quarterly meeting inside a mid-sized corporate office building on the city's north side. The facility's conference level had been arranged the previous evening with projectors, printed handouts, and assigned seating for department managers scheduled to present their reports. Patricia Johnson, 39, served as human resources manager for the company and routinely handled quarterly updates on safety compliance, onboarding statistics, and policy adherence. According to building card access logs, she arrived shortly before 8 a.m. and spent the hour prior to the meeting reviewing her printed documents and finalizing notes at her workstation. Co-workers later described her as consistent with preparation habits, often rehearsing talking points before entering the conference room. The conference suite contained standard office equipment, including rolling presentation chairs, cable hubs beneath the table, and portable storage cabinets positioned along the wall for forms and supplies. Several employees later told investigators that a marketing assistant, 34-year-old Dennis Crawford, had been seen adjusting one of the chairs earlier in the morning. Crawford had a documented pattern of minor workplace pranks, typically involving stick-on labels or swapped office supplies. His actions that day included placing small caster wedges beneath one chair, thin plastic shims commonly used to stabilize uneven casters. When inserted improperly, the wedges caused the rear wheels to sit slightly off balance, making the chair prone to sudden backward movement when weight shifted. At 9 a.m., security footage showed department heads taking their seats as the meeting began. Patricia entered the room carrying a binder and laptop, moved toward the designated presenter's chair, and sat while arranging her materials. As she leaned forward to connect her laptop to the table hub, the altered chair shifted unexpectedly. The raised rear caster slipped from the unstable wedge, causing the chair to roll back several inches. Patricia attempted to stabilize herself by shifting her weight, but the sudden movement caused her center of gravity to tilt sharply backward. Footage captured her falling from the chair and striking the back of her head on the corner of a portable storage cabinet positioned against the wall behind her. Several attendees reported hearing the impact, followed by Patricia collapsing to the floor without regaining balance. A staff member activated the building's internal emergency alert, and trained personnel initiated first aid procedures while waiting for paramedics. Responders arrived within minutes and documented signs consistent with severe head trauma, including lack of responsiveness and observable bleeding from the point of impact. Patricia was transported to a nearby medical facility, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical review later cited a fatal skull fracture and intracranial hemorrhage, resulting from the backward fall onto a fixed metal surface. Investigators examined the conference room layout, recovered the plastic caster wedges, and reviewed footage showing Crawford placing them beneath the chair prior to the meeting. The final report determined that the instability created by the wedges caused the abrupt chair movement leading to the fall. Crawford was removed from duty during the inquiry and faced charges related to negligent tampering with office equipment. Thanks for watching. Click the next video to watch more.